It's time for Aggrochat, the official podcast of the Tales of the Aggronaut blog and stalwart gaming community, where we talk about stuff and things, and the stuff about the things, and sometimes gaming. I'm Belgast, and let's start the show.
Hey folks, this is the second one of these re-releases, and I'm honestly not sure how long I'm going to keep up this practice of recording an intro, but this show also features Ashgar, Kodra, and Ray, and involved us getting deeply nostalgic about World of Warcraft and contemplating what a world would look like had that game not existed. On with the show.
Hey folks, it's time for Aggrochat again, and tonight I am joined by my good friends Ashgar.
Hello.
Ray.
Howdy, howdy.
And Kodra.
Hi.
So this is the second episode, and hopefully we still have people willing to listen. We had a very surprising number of listeners this week that downloaded the podcast, and I was kind of floored. I think at last count it was almost 200 people downloaded the podcast, which is shocking for the very first one. So as we did last time, we kind of brainstormed a list of things. Most of which we probably still won't talk about, because I think out of last list we had, 20 some items, and we actually talked about 3 of them, which is probably what's going to happen every week. I know for the most part we're all playing ESO, but what are you guys playing that is not Elder Scrolls Online? I know, Ash, you're playing something, or at least something that you were in a channel for the other night.
I've tried to poke my nose into a few things. Specifically, Age of Wonders. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, Age of Wonders.
Age of Wonders 3.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of 1 and 2, and I've not tried 3, but it sounded like it was pretty much the same as it was before, which is a good thing to me. How far did you end up making it, like, in a campaign?
Not very far. I took a big orc city in the campaign and stopped playing there. Because I don't know much, that was about 2 hours in.
Okay, cool. Kodra, you playing anything interesting?
Not interesting, but I've been continuing to play 2048 in my quest to 8192.
2048 is an evil game. I'm convinced that 2048 is the sign of the devil. But I know everyone else is really into that game. Because, what was it, a couple nights ago, I don't know, it's been about a week ago, I woke up one morning, and it was last weekend, I woke up and my wife was laying in bed playing 2048, and I'm like, oh god, it's infected my household.
Victory!
But yeah, that game is evil, and I caught myself playing it in a meeting the other day.
Was it that one that we were talking about tables?
No, it was the... Lord,
it was
I don't know
another meeting.
It was a different meeting, yeah. It was a totally different meeting. It was a painful meeting. Ray, what are you playing? Anything other than 2048 and ESO?
Well, I did a little bit of Landmark again. I logged in to pay my claim, and then 5 hours later, I decided it was time to be unconscious again. I did get my maze done for the contest.
That's really cool.
I hope they put more props in before the contest actually starts, so I can actually make it look, rather than, here's a dead end, have a shrub and a little glowy light thing.
I think this coming week's patch is when they're putting in the item upgrade system, where you can, instead of waiting on entirely random number generator to get decent items, you can apparently start to upgrade it, but the catch that I've heard is that you can only upgrade items that were crafted after the patch goes in, so...
I meant to play more games, but I just got distracted by all the other hobbies this week.
Well, yeah, and you've been working on our wonderful chibis, each one of us, and the Ray and Ashgar one is amazing. Now that you're no longer a pony. So, one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about was an interesting happening over on Twitter this week. You know how discussions devolve when someone brings up WoW, but I do not remember who started it, but essentially they were talking about how to some extent, the world would be a better place without WoW. And I had to speak up and disagree because I don't think we would have a lot of the nice things we have right now if there wasn't a WoW.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we would have still been stuck in a mode where, servers had populations of like 2,000 instead of 20,000 or 200,000.
Yeah, WoW definitely launched out there in that gaming, open lands and colonized it and made it safe for people to step into, and normal people started moving there as well.
And that was kind of my take too, was that a lot of the growth in the MMO genre happened because of WoW.
While I do not currently have a WoW subscription, it was my first MMO. I am one of the people that got hooked on the genre by that game.
So WoW was not my first MMO, but it might as well have been because I only dipped my toes into any of the ones I played before it. That said, I don't think the world would be a better place, or the MMO scene would be a better place if WoW never existed. But I do think that WoW has definitely poisoned the well for a number of things regarding MMOs.
Yeah,
and it's been a long, arduous climb out from under the shadow of WoW.
I feel like WoW is a double-edged sword. That it has done a lot of really good things for the genre, but it's also done a really lot of bad things for the genre. For everything like instances that is mostly fairly decent, you've got, Group Finder, which I think has been overall not that good for the genre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In certain respects, yes. It did enable some people to start doing grouping experiences that would not otherwise have been able to, or were not willing to go out of their way to.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what that tends to mean is you have to design dungeons around. You have to require less coordination for those types of dungeons.
Yes.
Yeah, like a Blackrock Depths, for example, or a Upper Blackrock Spire wouldn't have existed were the game planned around random strangers taking on the content.
This is kind of visible if you are at level for those instances and try to use the Dungeon Finder.
Oh, they're painful. Like, I did that while leveling my mage to 60. And those dungeons were extremely painful, even in the nerfed down state that they are now. But I also think those were really great dungeons. Like, they were really interesting dungeons, but I think they were designed for a more EQ mentality than what has become the WoW mentality.
I'll grant you that Blackrock Depths is interesting. I don't know if I'd call it good.
So, again, I know most of the people who ran it in vanilla have a very similar story to mine, but I love Blackrock Depths, and my story was I spent 6 hours in there, got maybe 2/3 of the way done before all of our gear was broken and we were stuck behind respawns and finally had to say, well, that was a fun run, but we're going to have to quit now.
Yeah, I totally had experiences like that. And I remember back then, we used to run it with 10 to 15 people, not just 5 people. And it was still that painful.
I didn't play the game when that was possible.
Yeah, but that was a thing. Like, people would run it with that many people.
And I have a fondness for those types of dungeons because Blackrock Spire, and I would not have met any of you guys if it were not for Blackrock Spire and the fact that as a rogue I was able to stealth those. And we formed a community around people who were running stealth runs of various dungeons to try and get just boss speed runs and boss kills.
Yeah, I mean, Late Night Raiders as a whole started out of just a safe group of people to run dungeons with. And
I got invited into that from Tam, and Tam was part of that organization that was doing stealth runs of dungeons.
So there was just, I guess there was just a vastly different pug culture at that time. And that's the only reason why I ever really bash the dungeon tool is I don't see that adding to that culture. You know, because people go in and expect not to have to communicate in these dungeons. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't.
that's true.
Communication has suffered in major ways, yes.
There have been so many dungeon runs that I've gone into, and it's been completely silent.
You know, I wonder if it would be better if, like, yeah, and you're kind of missing out on that textual communication, but I almost wonder if going the other route, offering alternative communication tools, like that's sort of
Smart
what
ping for WoW.
Yeah, ping for WoW. That's sort of what I've been taking away from League of Legends. Is I I get frustrated by the community because it's pretty toxic, but the communication via the ping system is really quite good, and it allows me to generally ignore what's going on in chat.
Isn't that what the target markers and then the ground markers are supposed to be for?
You only get those in raids.
Really?
Yeah, you only get them if you convert the group to raid. And the people have to be able to know that they need to convert the group to raid to get those.
That sounds like
Also,
So-
they don't have universal meaning like the LoL pings do.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, like, if there was a thing that was universally the attack this target first icon, and it was
Isn't
like...
that the skull?
Skull?
Well, yeah, I mean, Skull and Sheep the Moon. I mean, it's, there's a nomenclature that's developed around it, but for someone that's not familiar with the game, like, you don't know which one of these Lucky Charms is supposed to be what you hit.
Yeah.
So I actually had a macro in WoW when I used to do a whole bunch of Dungeon Finder as a tank, and I would basically, at the start of the raid, I'd be like, press a button and it spams group with, these are what all of these symbols mean.
I had a very similar macro.
I have also had a macro like that.
So maybe in that case we do. That's possibly why there is less communication, is because we've gone away from the textual communication, which is more time consuming, and go more towards pings and markers.
Just out of personal experience, I don't know when the last time I saw a skull in a Dungeon Finder group was.
I haven't played WoW in forever.
I also haven't played WoW in forever.
I pugged my way to 60 on the mage, basically, and that was pretty much chain running dungeons other than questing, and, I streamed a lot of it. And if you go back and look through those streams, maybe one or two of those dungeon runs had any marking at all. And I feel like I was in the minority for attempting to CC anything.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's got to be an answer to how to make random dungeons work without, a lot of communication, but...
Better marks would probably help. FF14, for example, had excellent marks.
Yeah, they did.
Like numbers.
And actually, like, even Rift has numbers, which are really useful. Like 1, 2, 3, and that's pretty much universal. I don't know. I feel like, back to the original thread, though, I don't feel like we would even be having these kinds of conversations without WoW.
No, I probably wouldn't be here.
Because, I mean, we think about, or at least, I don't know how many of you guys played. I know Ray and Ash didn't, but I don't know if you did, Kodra, or not, played EQ.
No, I never played EQ.
Well, back then, before the mention of WoW, the servers used to have populations listed. And same with Dark Age of Camelot. And it would literally say, okay, there are 1,500 people on this server right now. Or the highest of high servers were like 3,000 people. So I feel like it's just a different conversation scale-wise when WoW was brought into the mix. That it would still be the nichiest of niches, if not for a game like WoW polishing the genre enough to make it appealable to non-hardcore, basically mud players at the time.
Mud player?
Yeah, multi-user
Multi-user
dungeons.
dungeon.
Oh.
Those actually still get quite a bit of play. I
They
know
do.
a couple of friends of mine who play MUDs.
Yeah, like, I know people that still play MUDs regularly, and Gemstone, believe it or not, still is surviving and has their insane subscription price plans. I don't know who would pay $50 to pay a text-based game, but that's a thing. Because I think that's one of their subscription plans is still like $50 for the unlimited play on the MUD.
I've not heard of this game.
It's basically Play.net, or the folks that do the Hero Engine. They started off with Gemstone, which was their original text-based MUD, I think. And they had a bunch of other ones, but that was the big popular one.
Bonsai this week was telling me about this game. I can't remember what Asian country it was in, and it was really popular. But basically, you subscribe to be able to open chests, and that's pretty much all you do. You just keep opening chests over and over again, and there's people that will climb ladders doing that.
Ladders in game, or
Yeah,
or like
game
competition ladders.
Yeah, for who can open the most chests.
That's a bizarre concept.
I'll have to.
Competitive chest opening?
Yeah. So,
I mean, I like loot, but
there's lots of games people like playing.
yeah, I guess.
Yeah, not everything is for everyone.
It's true.
Well,
That continue.
Oh, I just I played Pokemon on the Game Boy, and I had a PlayStation, and I played lots of single player games. And then when I got into college, I started researching Ragnarok Online for a friend because they were trying to make a game of their own, and I was researching sprite, characters and whatnot. And Ragnarok Online was kind of my gateway game, and I thought, wow, this game is so awesome! You can actually talk to other people and watch them move around. And then I saw WoW, and that was kind of the end of it.
So Ragnarok Online was the game that I played before WoW. I played that when it was in beta, and it was a silly, funny game.
It's one of the few games I've never actually played. Like, I'm not even sure what it is, other than I like the sprite characters, but I don't know what kind of a game it is.
It's a very heavily PvP based game. I mean, you get your character to max level, and then they added it to where you could get quote unquote reborn, and then you would be a epic level character, and you could get to max level again. And every weekend or whenever the servers had it, you would fight for these keeps, and there was different a path that you would follow, and you'd have to try and get to the middle of the keep and whack on the crystal. And if you defeated the crystal, then you took over the keep. And it was just huge guild wars. You'd have one guild fighting another guild. Guilds would ally. Guilds would, wage war on each other. And it was always whoever had the most people won the most keeps. And there was various things based off of it, but there wasn't a lot to do in the game other than fight for these keeps.
That sounds like a weird mishmash of Lineage and Dark Age Camelot. Because I've played a little bit of Lineage, and it was kind of a clan versus clan type thing.
Yeah, there were a lot of people that I played Ragnarok Online with. I played on a private server, and a lot of the people also played Lineage. So it was an interesting crowd.
I know a lot of people who played Ragnarok Online. I know very few people who played Ragnarok Online on the original servers.
I feel like that was one of those games where the private server thing was just absolutely rampant.
Yeah, they made it pretty easy
Yes.
to make your own server. And even for the server that I played on, I actually got to help develop some stuff for it at one point and be a GM.
The only of the private server things I really messed with was there was one for EverQuest, and it was actually, at the time, I thought it was far superior to the actual EverQuest server, but I have no idea what happened to that. And I guess, in truth, I piddled around a little bit with the Star Wars Galaxies one that sprung up after the death of Galaxies. But that user interface was just too far gone for me. I guess for me, that's one of the things that has been at least good, is that with the birth of WoW came the WoW interface, which has its failings, but it's far superior to some of the other designs we had before WoW.
It's better than anything before it.
Exactly. Like, I mean, the Star Wars Galaxies interface, I don't know. I thought it was pretty horrible. Like, that was not one I could ever really use. And going back, like, in theory, I could probably play EverQuest, but the user interface is just too far gone for me. It's just not a good interface anymore. But then again, everybody always has the WoW one by default and rebels against anything that's not WoW, myself included.
Well, talking about interfaces, I really like the minimalistic interface of ESO, and I always felt like WoW's interface was way too crowded.
I tend to be one that likes a lot of stuff on the screen, but I've kind of gone towards accepting the ESO interface, or at least the add-ons I am running today are a greatly stripped down set of add-ons as compared to what I was trying to run during beta.
Yeah, I definitely had to get used to having less information fed to me playing ESO. Took a lot of getting used to.
So for me, it's I feel like I'm actually playing the game. When I was playing WoW, the best I ever got was this moment where I had a whole bunch of UIs that would play various Windows sounds, essentially, to tell me when to press the various buttons. But, I mean, if you didn't have some audible cue like that, the best way to DPS was really just to watch your hotbar and wait for cooldowns to come up.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever watched anything. I mean, with an energy-based class, all you need to do is spam the button continuously until it goes off.
I've watched my hotbar a lot, especially as a Death Knight and waiting for when I had the right runes up for the right abilities.
I can't currently play my Death Knight anymore because of that. I just got too used to playing other things.
Yeah, so basically like tanking as a Blood Death Knight is not super heavy. Watch the cooldowns, but playing as Unholy is just it's a horrible state right now. So instead, I play the class that I just mash buttons and. So Frost DPS is, it's you don't really have to pay attention to anything.
Yeah, sound was always really important to me in game cues.
Yeah. When I was playing the Fury DPS in Naxxramas in Wrath of the Lich King, I had, I believe, a 4-second cooldown, a 6-second cooldown, and a 10-second cooldown. I had to constantly watch and then weave in other DPS abilities in between those.
Yeah.
I've also gotten to the point where I don't really like short cooldowns in general.
Yeah.
You give me
Either
an ability
make it
where
instant or make it a long cooldown that you only have to hit every now and then.
Yeah, I like classes to be resource limited rather than cooldown limited.
Yeah. Well,
which is really fun with ESO because there is no cooldowns.
Playing Watch the Hotbar is like the worst thing ever. Because I don't know. I've gotten to the point where I never again want to play a game, as in like a new game, that requires me to have more than one hotbar of abilities. I like the deck type approach where you pick a few abilities and each one is an opportunity cost, and you have to build a character out of that. I mean, I liked it in Secret World, I like it in ESO, and to some extent I liked it in Guild Wars 2, but the choices of Guild Wars 2 just didn't seem to feel meaningful enough.
Guild Wars 2 I didn't like their approach as much.
I didn't have a huge problem with the abilities of Guild Wars 2. It was the content just drove me insane.
Well, their sort of ability system was a giant step down from the first game.
Yeah, the first game was really interesting. You could make some really interesting choices, and the big problem I had with the first game was I just didn't like the click to move interface.
You could eventually make it WASD, but I don't like actually playing Guild Wars 1, but the ability system is really cool.
Yeah, I just like the card-based approach in these games. Like when you're given a handful of abilities and you have to make interesting choices because of it.
I think my favorite combat system by far is still Aeon's Archer, with the jump shots and the movement-based buffs to your various stats. I mean, the rest of the game was very void, aside from the fact that it was really pretty. There wasn't any content or substance to it, but yeah, that, the whole bloodlust that you talk about on your characters where you just run off and kill things for hours on end without thinking about it. That's what the Aeon Archer did for me.
Weirdly enough, I didn't play a lot of Aeon, and I kind of feel like I missed something.
I don't think the mechanic was there for any other class.
Yeah, it was Archer specific.
Yeah, I mean, all the classes where you had it to where if you were moving forwards, it would buff your offense and decrease your defense. If you were moving backwards, it would increase your defense and decrease your offense. Side to side would increase your dodge and evade. So if you were a DPS character, moving forwards was how you could generate more damage. But as an archer, you were pretty squishy, so you wanted to be moving away from things. Well, there was an interesting use of the mechanics in the game to where you could be running forwards and away from a monster, but you could tab target it to lock on. And if you jumped and hit an ability midair, it would not only first of all, the game would automatically turn you around because that's what it did when you cast abilities. It would cut out the animation on the ability and the cast time, making it practically instant. And you also had that forward momentum buff to your damage. So you were basically constantly running away from things, kiting, and hitting your buttons to turn yourself around and deal damage instantly.
You just gave me nightmares of doing
Hunter Epic Quest?
Hunter Epic Quest, yeah, because that was
it's
pretty
kind
much
of like that as a game mechanic.
Yeah, no, sorry, that would not have been a thing I enjoyed. I didn't ever do my Hunter Epic because I was a dwarf and I got the dragon hand cannon, and once I got that, I stopped caring about doing the Rockdalar quest because it looked horrible for a hunter or for a dwarf hunter anyway. Like, nobody wants to be a dwarf with
Didn't like your flowering longbow?
A flowering longbow, yeah. But yeah, that. There were so many nightmares of doing that, and I could tell at that point I was not a hunter. Like, that was the moment I realized I was not a hunter, because Shiana and Aurelia and Chandra, they lived for that quest. They thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I hated that quest. I just wanted to stand up, fight things. Like, why am I running from this thing when I could just fight it? Yeah, that was the point at which I realized, oh yeah, you're a tank. Stop fighting it.
I did it. It was hard,
funny.
but I thought it was okay. It fits my mentality of shoot things and don't let them touch you.
Yeah, that's pretty much
like
the
kiting
opposite of
things.
my mentality. Kill all the things, get up in their face, and beat on them.
Yeah, that's
until
why my
they're dead.
Dragon Knight's such a paradigm shift for me, because I'm casting spells and I'm also in melee range.
I feel like that spec would be a melee caster I could like, especially if I was wearing heavy armor.
Yeah, I switched to heavy armor just because I was tired of almost dying all the time.
The nuke them until they die, and pray they don't kill you first.
Whatever you do, don't stop being a dragon.
Seems to work pretty well sometimes.
Honestly, that's kind of how I played my mage in WoW. Like, I didn't ever really run away from them.
They're like, dude, why are you standing in melee range?
You were playing Frost, weren't you?
I was playing Frost, yeah. I'm slowing stuff down, and it's gonna die before it gets to me. Otherwise, I'm screwed. Look, I'm bad at the concept of a caster. I realize I'm supposed to be afraid of the mob and make sure it doesn't hit me, but that never quite translates. But
My first WoW main was a hunter.
mine was a
I was
paladin.
a shaman.
Kodra was
and
your rogue.
Vanilla WoW's paladins would not suit you either, would they?
Not paladins were frustrating, and that's the main reason why I didn't level the paladin after a point. Is I really needed a group to make it work, and I tried to go Tankadin, and tanking as a paladin was just a thing that didn't work quite well.
Nope.
Because you had Seal of Rage, and that was your sole means of holding aggro, and you dealt so little damage that, I don't know, it was a frustrating experience. And the reason why Belghast exists is because I tried tanking Strat, and I tried tanking Skullomance, and a couple other instances as a paladin, and decided it just wasn't worth it. That Warriors did so much better of a job that I was a detriment to my group trying to tank as a paladin.
Aw.
But,
It was pretty much true at that point in WoW.
like, I had a lot of really understanding friends that would try and make it work, but, like, a DPS warrior would outhold aggro from a paladin and be a sturdier tank. Because back then, I guess, most of our tanks in that original, or Late Night Raiders, were not defensive warriors. They were arms, or fury.
Fury.
Or...
Yeah. They just slapped on a shield.
Yeah, I mean, and that didn't seem to be that big of a deal back then. But God, they could hold aggro.
Oh yeah.
I tanked his arms for most of. I leveled his prop, but then when I got to max level, I switched to arms and tanked his arms for most of it.
Specs were a lot less. They were almost more important, but also like prots. Some of them were so imbalanced as to be useless, like prot spec. Like that wasn't a very good spec.
Well, and honestly, all the way through Burning Crusade, if you did not have enough arms to give you deep wounds, you were not going to. I think it was arms that had deep wounds, or was it Fury?
It was arms.
Yeah,
It was arms.
If you did not have deep wounds, you were not going to hold aggro. Period. That was the warrior's sole means of really holding aggro was deep wound.
All warriors had to be 11 points in arms. All druids had to be 11 points in resto during that phase.
Which was just weird.
I thought it was 31 points in resto.
That was before that. I'm talking about Burning Crusade.
Oh, okay.
During Burning Crusade, Omen of Clarity was at 11 points in resto, and it was required no matter what spec you were.
I don't miss that at all. Like that's one of the things that I do like about the state that WoW ended up in, to where each spec is pretty much its own thing, and it has its own flavor. And other than, I don't know if rogues necessarily felt differently, but
I don't know if they know what to do with rogue right now.
I don't think they know what to do with a lot of the quote-unquote pure DPS classes.
They're working on it for hunters, at least.
Well, Beast definitely feels drastically different than the others, but I've not played Marks or Survival. Really know.
Marks and Survival played almost identically.
Okay. So yeah, so you still have two specs in a class that are exactly the same.
I know one of their
Or feel the
goals
same.
for Warlords was fixing that.
But
I guess we'll
I
see how
don't
they
know.
do.
I always play combat in my rogue, but that's mostly because I don't like sneaking.
Really?
Yeah, the other ones require subtlety.
Yeah, no, and I'm not
I
subtle
love
at
subtle.
all.
Well, the little that I did play of my rogue, once I think it was Wrath when they changed it. I played subtlety like crazy, just the teleporting behind them and ambush striking things. That was a lot of fun.
I played Rogue was actually my main, so I played a ton of combat back in the day because it was sort of the rating put numbers out there spec. But I had a lot of fun, and it always varied it up whether you had a dagger or a sword, and I preferred swords because I liked being sort of a swashbuckler rather than stabbing people in the back. Also, having a dagger meant that I couldn't really solo anything.
That was my thing. Like, I like rogues that feel like a swashbuckler, like almost a piratey type rogue. Whereas I just don't really like the backstabby assassin feel. And if a game allows me to play that
fun.
type of rogue,
it was just
that I really like it if it allows me to play that type of rogue. But although Rift, I think Rift probably has my favorite of those rogues because stealth wasn't a permanent mechanic and it didn't slow you down.
Rogue. I was gonna say Rift had my favorite type of rogue too. Only they kind of destroyed it after I got to level 50 with it.
Subtlety.
You liked the Mad Bomber.
I loved the Mad Bomber.
It was such a great concept.
Explosions.
That one poorly thought out talent.
Yeah, it was a really poorly thought out talent. It made total sense if you were using it as intended. Yeah, we're just going to add 1 to the bomb count. So instead of doing 5 bombs, you're going to do 6 bombs. Except it added 1 to every bomb count. So if you did 5 different bombs, it did 10 different bombs.
Oh, God. That's crazy.
Oops.
That was the one shot.
Yeah.
So, and there was another one that caused placing mines to cause 0 aggro. So you could walk up to something, place 5 separate mines on them, and then press a button and watch them fall over.
Well, I remember that you and I duoed some event out in Scarwood Reach, I think, And you were just happily walking along, placing bombs on the next encounter while I was fighting the previous one, and then you detonate.
Yup.
It was insane. It was... But I missed the fact that... I mean, I don't even know if it's a viable spec anymore.
It was really fun when I did it.
60. I think I made it to 62, at which point I decided, nah, I'm going to try something else.
I did really like the Night Stalker in Rift. He cast a rogue.
Night Stalker was probably my... Is it Night Stalker or...
The Night Stalker?
Rift Stalker?
I don't think it's... Rift Stalker.
No, Rift Stalker was the tank. I'm thinking of Nightblade?
Nightblade, yes.
Is it Nightblade?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they had, like, the spells, and that's the one I actually like playing, because it also had the very short duration stealth, to where you used it as an opener.
At launch,
but
it didn't have that.
Okay, yeah, it does now, where it's basically just an opener, where you stealth up for a few seconds, and then you get an opening attack on, and then...
At least it and the Assassin both had the same stealth.
So
just
like
with different, full stealth with the same, different names.
What I liked about the short duration stealth, though, was it didn't slow me down at all, so it was just a thing I did right before attacking. And that's ultimately the mechanic that I hate the most about stealth in general, is I don't like being slowed down to stealth. And I guess, like, in EverQuest 2, they had a class called the Dirge, which was their rogue meets bard. And it was basically a melee bard. But what was awesome about it was you could get it to the point where your stealth, because of Bard Song, was so much faster than most people's mounts. So you could just stealth around the zone, running at full speed for the most part. And I didn't mind that. That was fun. A little bit broken, but fun.
I tried to get my stealth to that point in WoW. Like with the Druid speed bonuses, you could get up to... you could negate the stealth penalty in cat form.
Oh, yeah.
I think they eventually made it a glyph, so it just completely removes the stealth penalty.
I don't know, as a druid, I run around in kitty form as much as possible for the speed boost.
And for the kitty.
Talking about all this stealth makes me go back to my old stealth runs with my rogue. And what always strikes me when I remember these things is rogues had this incredible toolkit of abilities that would help them stealth their way through dangerous areas that they only ever got to pull out in these stealth runs that were ultimately exploits of the system.
Yeah, and that never made any sense because, and not just rogues, all of the classes had these really wide kits of abilities that, if employed correctly, could have made some really interesting gameplay. But ultimately, they just ended up being used to exploit mechanics, like
I don't know what gameplay there was in gameplay there would have been in Eyes of the Beast.
Eyes of the Beast was cool.
I'm sure it was used for pulling.
Yeah, it was used for pulling. We used it to scout out areas.
And
then, just like Eye of Kilrog.
And then that the bug that they just could solo Naxxramas at 80.
That was hilarious.
It
was possible to spell seal
Bone Shield,
a enemy shield buff.
Oh wow, yeah. Okay, I remember that now. And you'd be running around with one of those crazy high-powered bone shields
like
during the entire thing.
1 million damage or something.
Yep.
1 million damage shield.
Because it was tuned for have like 25 players hit that person. And the boss does not do as much damage as 25 players do.
And while that's kind of a broken mechanic, I still think it's kind of cool because I can remember back in the day in EQ. Enchanters had no damage of their own, and they basically survived by charming a creature and making it fight for them. And I had friends who would go into these dungeons and charm the biggest, baddest thing they could find, and somehow manage to keep it charmed the entire time and solo boss encounters. And yeah, it was cheap and it was broken, but it took a lot of skill to keep that thing under control at all times. And they were constantly on the edge of dying horribly in a bad place. And I thought it was cool that was a mechanic that was actually a real mechanic.
That I hate to go back to Ragnarok Online, but that reminds me of something I used to do with my alchemists. They had the ability to create plants, like plant monsters that were in the world, except these plants would quote unquote fight for them. Well, you could also attack your own plants, and there was a sword you could get that would randomly, on hit, transform the monster you were fighting into something else. So I would get one of those and then sit there and punch my plants over and over and over again until it transformed into like a boss monster, and then I could run around zones with a boss monster fighting for me.
How long was that? How long did that last? Like, how long did the charm last?
The plant, I think they had a lifespan of starting at like 30 seconds up to 5 minutes.
Okay, so it was a short
Right,
duration.
but you could keep doing it. Like you could, once that one died, you'd spawn it again and then punch it and keep punching it until you got a monster that you wanted. It was really funny.
I do feel like some of these ideas are just missing from games nowadays. They just want to stay safe.
Like, there's a lot of interesting abilities that used to exist that were super niche and would only ever be used by a few players, but they created interesting gameplay. And, I mean, a lot of people had problems with, the various kiting methods that people had to level with in EverQuest, but it was interesting, like, that somebody figured out you could do that. And, I don't know, I feel like a lot of the abilities end up homogenized.
Yeah. It's like, this is how we want you to play the game.
Well, that's definitely a problem. Yeah, that's definitely a problem in WoW, is the classes feel very homogenized.
Well, especially right now. Okay, you have rogues, and then you have all these classes that have developed a combo mechanic that makes them feel like better rogues. Like, Retribution right now feels like you're playing a rogue that just happens to be better in almost every way other than the stealth. And, there's a lot of quote-unquote rogue mechanics that have entered into these games that the original class kind of feels like it got left in the dust. Like, I leveled my rogue to 90, but then I remembered, oh yeah, I don't really like playing a rogue that much.
I really liked playing my rogue back in vanilla, but yeah, I haven't gone back to it.
But at that point, the rogue was a very unique class. Like, that was a thing you only got from a rogue. But now there's lots of games that give you a rogue like, well, okay, druids had sort of rogues.
I recognize they weren't very good in vanilla.
Well, they had sort of rogues and sort of warriors and sort of priests. They were kind of the designer imposter class back in vanilla. They were kind of like these other classes, but not quite as good.
They had Innervate, which is why you had 31 points in Resto.
Yes, that is why very few non-Resto druids existed.
I feel like something got lost in the mix, though, whenever WoW decided they were no longer going to have the pure and hybrid class mentality. Because a lot of the classes that existed were the way they were because they were the pure version of a thing. And they were, by default, better at that thing than classes that were hybrids.
As someone who played Premier hybrid classes, yes, the hybrid classes benefited greatly from this distinction removal.
They did. And there's a lot of interesting mechanics that happened with the hybrids, but it also made it so that the hybrids were far more alluring to play because they could do all these different things and not be horrible at them the way they used to be. And I feel like a lot of the classes that were the pure version have suffered because of it, because, okay, you're this one thing, but you don't really get to do anything interesting. You're just this one thing, and you can play 3 versions of this one thing.
The mage can't exactly save the raid with tranquility when stuff starts to go bad.
Exactly.
A moonkin can.
Yeah, a moonkin can, or... it was the same problem that I had when I was playing a warrior, is I was really bitter for a while when paladins became the new flavor of the week tank. And druids always had struggled. I mean, druids have been that class that either is god mode or pure hell.
True tanking has had a lot of up and down.
Yeah, it's either you guys...
DPS has been silently OP for quite some time until they nerfed it fairly recently, I think.
Yeah, but I was fine with DPS being completely OP because it was one of the hardest rotations. So if you could pull that rotation off without letting things hit the floor, you deserve to do that kind of damage. Because trust me, I am horrible at at Druid DPS.
At this point, I'm probably not very good at it either.
Because I'm inevitably always going to drop one of my bleeds, and then my damage goes to hell. But I don't know. I feel like rogues and hunters and mages all suffer because they did away with the pure class, hybrid class distinction.
The fun ideas they did for warlocks seem to have worked out, though.
Well, but warlocks themselves were a hybrid. They kind of always were. I always felt like they were a hybrid.
They just do damage.
They just do damage. They do a lot of CC, and what they were used for in vanilla in raids was CC class, but really they were a damage class. Not even Fearbot, but like Banish Bot.
Because of the large number of fire elementals and other things in early raids.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was actually one of my favorite Blue Post jokes from LNR was the whole fear is a viable form of crowd control in instances. And I don't even remember which CM said it, but that one got reposted constantly.
Yeah, that became our refrain. Fear is a viable form of crowd control in instances.
I think it's funny, because in several other games now, fear has become a viable form of crowd control.
Well, even in WoW, it's a viable form of crowd control, because almost all of the classes... Almost all the classes that have fear have a glyph that makes it, be feared in place.
I don't know how many wipes I endured in vanilla because some warlock feared a mob and it ran off and trained another 2 packs into us.
This was the story of pugging. This was my pug story, leveling up my druid. Is there a warlock? Make sure they know not to fear things into other packs. But
yeah, that was pretty much every pug that I was in was that way, and it would be horrible. I mean, like, one warlock could wipe the raid, and if it was Guile, he would do so gleefully.
And as we all know, 3 warlocks can completely obliterate a zone.
It's true. Unfortunately, it was us that got obliterated.
And mind control them.
That was one of the worst ideas ever.
It sounded like such a great idea, right? On paper.
Yeah, for those...
You're going to need to actually explain that.
Yeah, I'm going to have to explain it. I'm forgetting that there are people without the ancestral knowledge of 3 imps. Okay, so in Zul'Gurub, there were these packs of imps.
Back when it was a 20-man raid.
Back when it was a 20-man raid. And when you killed an imp, it would summon a Voidwalker. And someone had...
No. 2 Voidwalkers.
It would summon 2 Voidwalkers, making it even worse. And someone had the brilliant idea of controlling...
Well, okay, so normally what happened was you had 1 or 2 warlocks in your raid, and you would use those 1 or 2 warlocks to mind control 1 or 2 of the pack, and then you would DPS down the other one, and then you would DPS down the adds that spawned. And then you would break one of the mind controls and DPS that one down, and then DPS down the Voidwalkers that spawned, and then rinse and repeat until the pack was cleared. We finally got to a raid where we had 3 warlocks in it, which was very unusual for us. And so our raid leader was like, hey guys, I've got a great idea. Let's take our 3 warlocks and mind control all 3 of these imps. And then we'll send them and they'll go fight those 3 imps in the next pack. And they did that. And then all 6 imps died at once. And 12 Voidwalkers spawned. And that pretty much was unkillable.
Yeah, we wiped very quickly. So, take these 3 imps is never good advice. But the thing is that was an interesting mechanic. And I just don't see a lot of instances having places where you could make horrible decisions like that anymore.
Well, one of the problems with having those interesting mechanics was like Nax at level 80, the instructor boss where you had to have 2 priests in your raid mind control his students and have the students tank him. For some reason, the priests in our group were like the weakest links in general, and when it came time that we had to rely on them to do that, we didn't kill that boss. Like, we had to bring in other priests in order to do that fight.
The problem with that was that you needed hit, or the mind control would get resisted. And the only people that had hit as priests were shadow priests, which were damned near non-existent back in vanilla.
This was in...
And
I guess vanilla too, but it recurred in 80.
Yeah, I mean, it was like they were just non-existent. Like, priests were healers, just like druids were healers. And we lucked out. We had a couple of shadow priests in our raid, and even though I think we only downed him once, we
downed him a bunch. We downed him a bunch. Yeah.
Okay.
He was our most reliable kill. I remember we spent like the 2 weeks it took us training our priests on how to get those up playing poker with the rogues.
The worst thing about that fight was, at that point, multi-shot was in the hunter rotation. Like, we had to have it to do decent DPS, but you did not want to multi-shot those packs because any damage would be a horrible thing on the ads because they were paper thin.
Yep.
Man,
I enjoyed it.
I
because,
totally did not expect this to be a WoW memory lane trip. But
you said it yourself.
WoW
derails conversations.
It does, but this is okay. So everything that we have talked about, this is my point from Twitter the other day, was none of this would have existed.
Yeah, but at the same time, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about hasn't existed for a while.
Well, true, but
it did, and other things built on it, both WoW and other games.
So there were a lot of bad mistakes in some of this design, but there were little nuggets of it that were really good. And even if WoW hasn't latched onto it, other games have.
I feel like this is the issue, though. It's not WoW at vanilla. I think WoW at vanilla was... I mean, I don't think it was perfect. It had its flaws, but it was a lot of the decisions that was made post the Burning Crusade that sort of poisoned the well for the future. Yeah. And now a lot of the stuff that I remember fondly about vanilla WoW, all of the weird stuff, all of the edge casey, exploity type stuff that we did, that doesn't exist. The games are too smooth, too flat now.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that Blizzard does and does well, is they kind of sand off the rough edges and make it consumable by the masses, but in doing so, they make the end result far less interesting. And I know we've had conversations about Heroes of the Storm, and for me, who is not a serious League player, them sanding off the edges is a good thing for me. Like, the item build thing confuses the shit out of me, still, even though I have a few champions that I feel like I know what I'm doing with. And to me, that's what they've done with Heroes. That's what they've done with Hearthstone.
I just find it too limiting.
Down the edges.
Because,
it is.
There is no way to make a champion do something it was not intended to do in Heroes of the Storm. Ever. This is never something that's going to happen. There
are basically a list of approved build paths that you can have, and it's based on, originally it's like 2 decisions, and then it eventually becomes one of 5 decisions each time you ding after you unlock those extra abilities. But still, there's no emergent gameplay from, and even though I hate that term generally, that's what it is. I mean, it's emergent gameplay. There'll never be a blue Ezreal build.
AP Tristana.
Or AD Balthazar.
Yeah, I mean, there'll never be these weird, oddball, really perfect for a specific situation builds.
Or even simpler things, like choosing to go tank Nocturne or damage Nocturne.
Yeah. And you can build a tanky, or build a champion with more survival, but if they don't have the tank abilities in their list of predetermined choices, they're never going to have them.
That's a little sad.
So I don't know how I feel about that.
But I feel like what they've done for Heroes and what they've done for Hearthstone, because really, if you look at Hearthstone, it's WoW with all the pointy bits sanded off.
You mean
Magic?
Magic?
Well, Magic, yeah. Magic with all the pointy bits sanded off. And Heroes is League with all the pointy bits sanded off. And I think in both
I think
cases,
what they have left might just be rolling downhill.
You can end up with a circle or a sphere. I don't know, but I still feel like in both cases they're going to be something that's easier for someone who is not a traditional fan of that genre to adopt.
I feel like
Probably, yes.
I feel like there is an amount of grit to a game that you want, an amount of unrefined quality, because and WoW, vanilla WoW had a lot of it. They've just kept sanding since then. Like, they took something that was a block of wood, EverQuest UO, and sanded it a bit. And that game was very interesting. I feel like a lot of the more recent entries that follow that, like, and even WoW, like, I've played every single expansion. I'm probably not going to play Heroes of Draenor or Warlords of Draenor.
Yes.
I mean, it's entirely possible that I will, but I played Pandaria, and I was just it felt very dull to me.
You stayed in longer initially in Pandaria than I did.
Yeah, I did this because I was like, I really want to do raiding content. There wasn't anything to fill that gap for me. And then I did raiding content, and I was like, this is dull too.
That was kind of the experience I had, and granted, I purposely chose the rougher of the raids, but I didn't feel like I missed something, but the thing I missed no longer existed. Like, I missed the rating that we used to have, but that rating doesn't exist anymore in that game. And it was, it's just it's a lost artifact of a different time. And
somebody's trying to bring it back. Two somebodies, in fact.
One of those somebodies, I don't know if they're going to succeed in actually bringing it back. I mean, the artifact of that content wasn't just because you had 40 people. It was the design of the content that made it weird. And
the content was also much easier, simpler, honestly. Like, it was simpler content with less usable controls.
Yeah. And you had to create more creative solutions to get through it, even though the core of it was pretty simple. But I felt like you could out tactic a problem, even if you weren't geared to where you needed to be the content. And that's not a thing that, I mean, it feels like there's just hard gear caps that you have to be this tall to ride the ride to get past it.
Those kind of existed before too.
We did a lot of our content actually quite understated because very few people actually used flasks in our raid. But we were able to typically use more. There was a lot of interesting solutions, and there were a lot of interesting problems, which were basically systems that are less usable. Like, Threat is now a system that is almost entirely designed around, if you're doing your rotation, you will hold Threat on something.
Well, it's no longer a question. Like, I mean, if you are the tank and you pull aggro at first, you will have vengeance and it will hold your threat, period. There's no question of it anymore. Threat is no longer something you have to do. But I remember that I used to have a set of gear for threat and a set of gear for
surviving.
Survival, and a set of gear for, clearing.
I was lazy. I did not have these sets of gear.
And a set of gear for fire resist, and a set of gear for nature resist, and Bill's bags were quite full.
They were. Like, you had to carry around your fire resist set, you had to carry around your nature resist set, you had to carry around all these other things.
I'm so glad that by the time I became a raid tank, resist was almost completely dead. And after Saffron, it died completely.
That was really the last fight I can remember anyone caring about frost resist or any kind of resist at all.
Yep.
But if you want to talk about a game that's going back to making Threat a more hidden system, ESO is doing a great job of it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're still in that magic phase where we don't understand the rules yet. And the rules are complex enough that it's going to take us a while to figure out the rules. And that the rules change on us.
There are so many rumors about this game.
Well, that was what made EverQuest,
Even now that
really
it's
cool.
launched, so many not understood things.
Look, Ancient Cyclops is that's still one of the coolest things. Nobody really knew what was going on there. It was probably just a timer that was a variable length. But there were so many rumors in how to spawn the Ancient Cyclops. You had to kill all the tarantulas first. No, you had to kill all the desert madmen. No, you had to kill all the mummies. And you had to wait for the third day. And it gives me such glee to sit back and watch the same kind of rumors circulating about werewolves and vampires. That's magical to me.
Hey, Ashgar.
Yes?
Trolls, weak to fire? Yes, no?
Yes.
Have you fought trolls yet?
Yes.
Yes, they are.
I don't know. I have fire as part of my normal rotation, and they go down easily. So, yeah, I wasn't sure if they were weak to fire or not.
I was pretty sure.
I'm fairly certain that the answer to this is yes.
Yeah, because I definitely noticed them regenerating a ton of health, and then somebody came along and tagged them with fire, and they stopped.
Yeah, I have fire as a set bonus, so I was able to do something similar.
Yeah, fire seems to be good against trolls, but yeah, that's another one of those weird little things.
Well, and are undead weak against fire?
Who knows?
Because normally that's a thing.
Sure fire
That's actually another really funny thing about this game is that there's a lot of odd immunities. Like undead are immune to bleeding, which is
skeletons.
Something I have. They're skeletons, but that's something I haven't seen since Vanilla WoW.
Yeah. Because nobody wants to try and program around a weird, quirky immunity that this one thing has.
Well, WoW stopped using it because it was cutting into their classes.
Yeah.
Like, if this thing was immune to fire, then guess what your mages were not doing?
Oh, yeah, our mages were all Frostspect for, up until Encourage. Because lots and lots of fire resist stuff.
I think a good subtitle of this episode is going to be, the magic of nostalgia.
Well, I think this is ultimately back to that discussion. What has been Warcraft's impact on the MMO scene?
It's huge.
It's huge.
It's huge, yeah.
There's no one thing. It's not all bad, and it's not all good.
Yeah.
But I still think, like I said, there's a lot of stuff that just wouldn't exist or wouldn't have been given a chance if WoW had not been the success and had not spurred on the venture capitalist investment in MMOs. There's a lot of games that never would have seen the light of day that, while they may not be massively popular, they still have their little niche and have now survived in free-to-play.
Even not free-to-play. FF14 launched on the PS4 last week.
FF14 is really kind of the comeback kid, because while we're not playing it, I don't have a lot bad to say about that game.
It's a game I would be open to playing.
Really good.
It's not a game I left upset with, like certain other games.
If you guys were to tell me, hey, we all want to go back and do dungeon content together, I would probably say, sure, let's do that. Because there was enough there to make me happy. It was just, I felt like I had played both sides of the game at that time, which were Quest Up or Fate Grind. And I realize they've added in more stuff since then, but it wasn't fast enough to keep me from letting my subscription lapse.
Yeah, I don't know what they've done since I let my subscription lapse.
They've had 3 major content patches, I think.
Did they ever add
implemented
a
Leviathan.
level 45 to level 50 section?
You mean other than Northern Thanalan?
Yes, other than Northern Thanalan.
No.
I don't think they've added any more zones.
They did not add any more zones, as far as I'm aware.
More quests?
Oh, you mean for Quest for that?
Yeah.
Well, there are things covering that gap now, sort of. There are a lot of daily quests.
Okay.
There's a wide variety of daily quests.
The dungeons are now worth not terrible XP.
Yeah. But there's some kind of artifact hunting mini game now, and the chests that you get off of the various leaves are actually good.
They were decent before, but they were kind of rare.
That's just what I do remember. Is I remember after that after I had done my first character, my second character was kind of mind-numbing.
Yes, I also had this experience.
Yeah, I mean, and that was what killed it for me, was I did a really fun character of leveling my warrior all the way up off quests, and it was a blast, and I loved that game. And then I ground Bard up with, well, actually ground Dragoon to some extent, and then Bard additionally with Fates, and I hated that game. It was boring, and it was twitchy, and it just wasn't any fun because it didn't feel like individual combat mattered. It was only about running these events.
I did it a bit differently.
Yeah.
After getting my first character to 50, I leveled Paladin almost entirely through dungeons, which resulted in me running some dungeons a whole bunch of times, but because that game was tank-starved, tanks get nearly instant queues.
You had a lot more patience than I did.
Yeah, bugs in that game were not that bad, generally speaking.
Yeah, pugs were not typically bad. I did that
Provided
too
your
with
tank
my
was good.
paladin. Yeah, provided the tank was good. I definitely enjoyed the one boss that let you, if you didn't do the tanking exactly right because of the latency between the abilities animation and the abilities actual damage area, you would end up like burning your entire raid.
Yeah, that was
Stone
frustrating.
Vigil was so much fun, wasn't it?
Stone Vigil was so much
The problem
fun.
with running dungeons to level was that
Swinge!
there was, generally speaking, one dungeon per level range.
And
And that's
did it to
one
death.
thing that ESO has done a lot better, is that I feel like we have a wide variety of dungeons per range to where I'm not getting bored with this one dungeon.
It's true, but I typically don't have a reason to rerun those dungeons.
I've ended up rerunning them a lot to get various people
Yeah,
through.
but you're a tank.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
getting various people through is the reason to rerun them.
The gear is not good enough to make it where you want to grind it over and over to try and get the one item. But I feel like that's
Because you can make
benefit
gear
of
that
having-
good.
Well, exactly. That's the benefit of having a gearing system through crafting, where you can make stuff as good, if not better, than the stuff you get from drops. But well, at this point, we have gone an hour and 15 minutes.
All right.
So we probably need to cut it off, because I don't know how much longer people are going to be willing to listen. But I think we had a lot of good conversation tonight.
All right.
All right.
Anyway,
See you next
thanks
week.
again, guys.
See you.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah.